They say you only realize what you've lost when it's gone. But for me, the realization struck every time I walked through this empty house. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the corners, faint but persistent, like a cruel reminder of what used to be. Her laughter, once the melody that filled these walls, now haunted them like a ghost. It's been weeks since Grace walked out that door. She didn't slam it, she didn't shout. She just left. With that cold, sharp look in her eyes and a suitcase packed with the remnants of our life together. She said she was done living in this cage, done waiting for me to give her the life she deserved. But all I could hear was the echo of her final words, "You'll never be enough, Alex."
I sat at the table tonight, staring at the worn-wood surface, where the three of us once had dinners. Grace, Sam, and I, a picture of a family trying to hold on. I ran my fingers over a scratch that Sam had left when he was trying to cut his chicken with a butter knife. Grace had laughed then, her head thrown back, her red hair catching the evening light. She used to laugh like that for me. When did it stop? When did her laughter turn into sharp sighs, her smiles into tired glances? Was it when the bills piled up on that very table? When my late nights at the factory became her lonely nights at home? Or was it when she began to dream of something better? I couldn't blame her for dreaming. Grace was never meant for this small-town life. She was the kind of woman who belonged to city lights and champagne toasts. When we first met, I thought I could build her the world she deserved. She was magnetic, her confidence pulling everyone into her orbit. I fell hard and fast, promising myself I'd give her everything she ever wanted. But promises don't pay the bills. Promises don't fix a broken boiler or put a child through school. And maybe that's why, one day, I came home to find her sitting at this very table, her suitcase by her side, and that cold, resolute look on her face. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she'd said. Her voice wasn't angry, it was calm, too calm. "I've wasted enough years waiting for something that will never come. I need to move on." She didn't even look back when she left. Now, the silence eats at me. Sam, my boy, tries to fill the void with his small jokes and brave smiles, but I see it in his eyes. He misses her. And as much as I want to hate her for what she did, I can't stop thinking about her. I can't stop wondering, was I really never enough? I met Grace on a humid summer evening, the kind where the air feels heavy, and the horizon glows with a dusky orange. She was standing at the bar, her red dress catching the low, golden light like a flame. I remember thinking she didn't belong there, not in a small-town dive filled with the smell of spilled beer and faded dreams. When she laughed, it wasn't at anything I said. It was at the bartender's clumsy attempt at a joke. But that laugh, it hit me like a punch to the gut. Confident. Carefree. It was the sound of someone untouched by the weight of the world. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse raced. She turned to me with a raised eyebrow, her lips curving into a half-smile that was both an invitation and a challenge. "Sure," she said, gesturing to the stool beside her. "But I don't share my drinks." That was Grace. Sharp, playful, and completely in control. By the end of the night, I was hooked. Our relationship burned fast and bright. She moved into my place after a few months, and suddenly, my drab little house felt alive. She brought color into my world, literally. She painted the kitchen a bold green, hung cheap fairy lights in the living room, and filled the fridge with wines I couldn't pronounce. We got married in the fall, under a canopy of rustling leaves. For a while, life was beautiful. We laughed. We danced in the living room to old records. When Sam was born, it felt like everything we had ever wanted was finally within reach. But dreams, I've learned, are fragile things. They crack under the pressure of reality. Grace's first complaints were subtle, a sigh here, a frustrated glance there. "I thought we'd be further along by now," she'd said one night, folding laundry while I fixed a leaky pipe under the sink. "You're working so hard, but it's not enough." Her words stung, but I told myself it was temporary. I was saving for a promotion, for a better house, for the life I'd promised her. Yet, with every passing month, the gap between what we had and what she wanted seemed to grow wider. Then the men started coming around. At first, it was harmless. A guy from her art class who wanted to buy one of her paintings. A coworker who stopped by to drop off something she'd forgotten at the office. But their visits became more frequent. A smile here, a lingering touch there. One night, I came home late from the factory to find her in the driveway, laughing with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, his hand resting lightly on her arm. I stood in the shadows, watching as she tilted her head back and laughed like she used to laugh with me. When she finally came inside, her eyes barely met mine. "Just a friend," she said with a shrug, brushing past me. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself she was just trying to find something to distract her from the monotony of our life. But deep down, I knew. The woman I fell in love with was slipping away, and I had no idea how to hold on to her.
The changes in Grace weren't sudden. They came gradually, like the tide creeping in, quiet and unstoppable. At first, it was little things, her laughter no longer reaching her eyes, her kisses growing brief and mechanical. Then it was the late nights, the unanswered questions, and the men who came and went. I tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to the weight of our struggles. She's just restless, I told myself. We all get restless sometimes. But the nights she didn't come home until the early hours became more frequent, and the air between us thickened with silence. It wasn't until that one night that I truly realized how far apart we had drifted. She arrived at the house in a sleek black car, its headlights cutting through the darkness of our quiet street. I had been sitting in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper, though my eyes hadn't moved past the same paragraph for over an hour. When the car pulled up, I moved to the window, peeking through the curtain like a thief in his own home. She stepped out first, her heels clicking against the pavement, followed by two men. One of them, dressed in a tailored suit, held the door open for her, while the other laughed at something she said. Her red hair shimmered under the porch light, and she moved with the confidence of someone who knew she had the world at her feet. They walked to the door together, their voices muffled but lively. I froze as the doorknob turned and she stepped inside. "Alex," she said, her voice casual, as though she hadn't been gone all night. "You're still up?" Behind her, the men lingered in the doorway, their laughter fading when they saw me. She turned to them with a slight smile. "Thanks for the ride, boys. I'll see you around." And just like that, they were gone. "What was that?" I asked, my voice low but shaking with restrained anger. She shrugged, brushing past me toward the kitchen. "Nothing. Just friends. Don't make a big deal out of it." "Friends?" I repeated, the word sour in my mouth. "Grace, they're not just friends, are they? What's really going on here?" She turned to me, her eyes cold and distant. "What's going on," she said, her tone sharp, "is that I'm tired, Alex. I'm tired of this house, this life. I'm tired of you pretending that everything is fine when it's not." Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, she grabbed a glass of water and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there, stunned and alone. I wanted to follow her, to demand an explanation, to fight for what we had. But something inside me held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the sinking realization that she had already made up her mind. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her movements in the next room. The distance between us felt immeasurable, even though we were only separated by a wall. The woman I loved was slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach her.
It was a cold Thursday evening when Grace finally shattered what was left of our life together. The dinner table was set for two. Sam was staying with our neighbor for the night, and I had planned this quiet dinner as a way to talk to her, to salvage what little remained. The food was simple, roast chicken and vegetables, nothing extravagant, but something I knew she liked. She came in late, as usual, her heels echoing through the hallway. The sharp click of each step felt like a countdown. When she saw the table, her eyes darted to mine, but instead of gratitude, I saw impatience. "What's all this?" she asked, tossing her coat over the back of a chair. "Dinner," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I thought we could talk." She sighed and sat down, barely glancing at the meal. Her posture was tense, and her gaze kept drifting to the clock on the wall. "What's there to talk about, Alex?" she finally said, breaking the silence. "Us," I replied, leaning forward. "Grace, I know things haven't been easy. I know you're unhappy. But I'm trying. I'm working harder than ever. For you. For Sam. For us." She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something: regret, hesitation, maybe even guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, distant look she'd mastered. "You don't get it," she said, shaking her head. "It's not about working harder. It's about working smarter. It's about having ambition, Alex. Vision. And frankly, you don't have it." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I felt the heat rising in my chest, anger mixing with desperation. Vision? Grace, we built this life together. We have a son. Doesn't that mean anything to you? She stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. "Don't make this about Sam," she snapped. "This isn't about him. This is about me. And I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "This," she gestured around the room, her face a mask of frustration. "This house, this life. It's suffocating, Alex. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay living like this. I need more. I deserve more." I stood, my hands gripping the edge of the table as I tried to hold myself together. "Grace, you can't just walk away from us. From me. From Sam. We're a family." Her laugh was bitter and sharp. "A family? What kind of family is this?" "A broken one. And I'm done trying to fix it." She turned and headed to the bedroom, leaving me standing there. Moments later, she emerged with a suitcase in hand. "Grace, wait," I pleaded, stepping in her path. "Don't do this. Please. We can work through it. I love you." She stopped, her eyes locking with mine. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might reconsider. But then she said the words that would haunt me forever. "Love isn't enough, Alex." And with that, she walked out the door. I followed her to the porch, watching as she climbed into a waiting car. The man in the driver's seat didn't even glance my way. As the car disappeared into the night, the silence around me was deafening. I stood there, frozen, until the cold seeped into my bones and forced me back inside. When I closed the door, it felt final, like the end of something I couldn't piece back together. The night Grace left, the silence in the house was unbearable. Every corner seemed to echo with her absence. Sam was still at the neighbors', thankfully spared from witnessing the moment his mother walked out. But I wasn't spared. I sat in the kitchen for hours, staring at the empty space where she used to sit, the faint impression of her glass still visible on the table. I tried to distract myself with the bottle of whiskey in the cabinet, but every sip only sharpened the edges of my despair. Her words rang in my ears, over and over: "Love isn't enough, Alex." By midnight, the whiskey was gone, and the house had become a prison of memories I couldn't escape. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, hoping the cold air would clear my head. The streets were deserted, the kind of quiet that only comes in the dead of night. I walked aimlessly, my breath visible in the freezing air, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. I passed the factory where I'd spent so many years working overtime to give her everything I could. I passed the diner where we'd shared cheap dinners on special occasions. Every step brought me closer to memories I didn't want to confront. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of the park. The snow-covered trees glistened under the dim glow of the streetlights. There was a bench near the path where Grace and I had once sat, years ago, watching Sam toddle around in the leaves. I collapsed onto it, the cold seeping through my coat, but I didn't care. I didn't notice how quickly the cold began to numb me. My thoughts drifted, unfocused, as the alcohol dulled the sharpness of the pain. I thought about Sam, how he'd look at me tomorrow, searching for answers I didn't have. I thought about Grace, her laughter from years ago, and the way it had slowly turned into something hollow. But mostly, I thought about the promises I'd made to her, promises I couldn't keep. I didn't hear the footsteps approaching until they were close. "Alex?" It was Sam's voice, trembling and scared. He shouldn't have been here, not at this hour. How had he found me? "Dad," he called again, closer now. I tried to respond, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The cold had settled deep into my bones, and my vision blurred as I saw his small figure running toward me. He grabbed my arm, shaking me. "Dad, get up. Please." His voice broke something in me, and I tried to move, but my body refused. I heard him yelling for help, his voice cutting through the stillness of the night. The last thing I remembered was his tiny hands gripping mine, tears streaming down his face. Then, everything went dark. When I woke up, the world was quiet again. Not the empty, suffocating quiet of the house that Grace had left behind, but a muffled stillness, as if the world outside no longer mattered. My body ached, and when I tried to move, pain shot through every limb. Slowly, I realized I wasn't home. The sterile smell of antiseptic told me I was in a hospital. The dim hum of machines nearby confirmed it. I turned my head and saw Sam sitting in the chair beside the bed, his small frame curled up, his head resting on the armrest. His face was streaked with dried tears, but his breathing was slow, steady. "Sam," I croaked, my voice barely audible. His eyes flew open, wide and filled with relief. "Dad," he said, jumping up. His arms wrapped around me before I could even sit up properly. "You're okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought you weren't gonna wake up." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hands moved to his back, holding him close. His warmth felt like the only thing anchoring me to the world. "I'm sorry, Sam," I finally managed. "I'm so sorry." He pulled back, his eyes filled with tears again. "Why didn't you come home? Why were you just lying there? I called for you, but you wouldn't move." His words hit me harder than any cold ever could. I'd failed him. In my grief, I'd left him alone, and he'd had to save me when it should have been the other way around. I was lost, I admitted, my voice thick with shame. "I didn't know what to do, Sam. I didn't know how to be strong." "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said, his small hands gripping mine tightly. "Just don't leave me, Dad. Please." I swallowed hard, nodding. "I won't, Sam. I promise." The hospital discharged me later that day, but the weight of that night stayed with me. Every time I looked at Sam, I saw the fear in his eyes when he'd found me. And every time I walked past Grace's empty closet, I felt the echoes of her absence. Sam was quiet for the first few days after we came home. He stayed close to me, always watching, as if afraid I might disappear again. I didn't blame him. I knew I had to do better, to be the father he deserved. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts at the factory to make sure we had enough to get by. But at night, when Sam was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table and stare at the place where Grace used to sit, wondering if she even thought about us. One evening, Sam came to me with a piece of paper in his hand. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "I drew this in school." I took it from him and saw a simple drawing, two figures holding hands, standing under a bright sun. "It's us," he explained, pointing. "Me and you. You're smiling here." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "It's beautiful, Sam. Thank you." "You don't smile much anymore," he said softly, his eyes full of a quiet wisdom that no child should have to carry. I pulled him into a hug, holding him close. "I'll work on that," I promised. For him, I had to. 15 years had passed since the night Grace left and everything fell apart. Sam was a grown man now, strong and determined, with the kind of drive I had always admired. He'd made a life for himself, far beyond the limits of our small town. As for me, I had found peace, or something close to it. Life wasn't easy, but it had steadied. The scars of those years lingered, but they didn't define me anymore. I thought of Grace less and less as the years went on. She became a shadow in my memory, a part of a past I rarely revisited. But on the 15th anniversary of that cold night, something pulled me back, not to her, but to him. To Sam. To the boy who saved me. I visited the cemetery that day, just as I had every year since I'd almost lost myself. The headstone was simple, marked with a name that still felt raw, Alex Hart. Beloved husband and father. I laid down a single flower, as I always did, and sat there in silence. For a long time, I thought I'd failed him, that my grief had stolen his chance at happiness. But Sam had proven me wrong. He'd built a life, one that honored everything Alex stood for. "Hey, Dad," Sam's voice came from behind me. I turned to see him standing there, tall and confident, but with the same warmth in his eyes that had always kept me grounded. "Hey, kid," I said, standing to hug him. We talked for a while about everything and nothing. He told me about his work, his plans, the life he was building. Pride swelled in my chest as I listened. "Have you thought about her?" he asked suddenly. It took me a moment to realize he meant Grace. The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. "Not in a long time," I admitted. "She made her choice, Sam. And we made ours." He nodded, but something in his expression told me he wasn't done with her. A week later, Sam asked me to go with him to a charity gala in the city. He'd been invited by someone from work, and though I wasn't one for social events, I agreed. I didn't expect to see her there. Grace looked different, older, but still unmistakably her. Her once bright red hair was now streaked with gray, and the confident gleam in her eyes had been replaced by something I couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps, or exhaustion. She saw us before we saw her. Her breath caught when our eyes met, and for a moment, I could see the memories flashing through her mind. "Sam," she said softly, stepping toward him. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice wavered, the control she once wielded now gone. Sam didn't move for a moment. Then he smiled, but it wasn't warm. "It's been a long time, Grace." He didn't call her Mom. She flinched at the omission but nodded. "It has." They talked, though I stayed back, letting them have their moment. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. Her apologies. His calm, measured responses. And finally, his parting words. "I don't hate you, Grace. I just don't know you anymore. And I think that's for the best." When Sam turned back to me, I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. He had let her go, just as I had years ago. That night, as we drove home, the city lights fading behind us, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I realized that the wounds she had left didn't hurt anymore. We had built something stronger out of the pieces she'd left behind. And that was enough. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.